7 years had passed since the young hounds first stepped foot in the Baskerville training grounds. Today, they faced a fierce monster that resembled a bear with horns. As the monster charged at them, the young hounds attacked it with their swords, one after another. Watching from the sidelines was Baskerville Clan Shadow Hound Staffordshire Baskerville, the instructor of the young hounds. He knew that facing opponents stronger than them was a daunting task, so he shouted out instructions to the young hounds, telling them to aim for the hind leg to slow down the monster instead of targeting the vital points from the beginning. The triplets among the young hounds coordinated their strikes, leaving the monster exhausted. Staffordshire was impressed and thought to himself that their dark crimson aura was very suitable for the Baskervilles. After the triplets had weakened the monster, the other young hounds resumed their attacks and finished it off. Staffordshire applauded the young hounds and congratulated them on becoming low-rank sword experts and masters of the first Baskerville technique. Staffordshire reminded the young hounds that they were facing a caged monster and that the wild ox bear on La Rouge-et-Lenoir mountain would be quite different. He warned them that death could occur much more easily than they thought, and they must use their bloodline to overcome it or build their experience to survive somehow. With that, the instructor concluded the 7-year training and congratulated the young hounds on their graduation. He wished them good luck in their future endeavors. After the successful completion of their training, the young hounds started chatting among themselves. 2 hounds were discussing their preferences for the various night orders within the Baskerville clan. The first hound mentioned that he preferred the Wolfhound order, while the second hound shared his choices, Doberman, Pitbull, and Rottweiler. There were 7 night orders in the Baskerville clan, each established and managed for various objectives, such as watching, searching, guarding, assassinating, suppressing, and all-out warfare. Suddenly, the first hound asked his companion where he thought that bastard would go. The second hound asked in confusion who was he referring to. The first hound clarified that he was referring to the person sitting on the dead ox bear, who is none other than Vikir. They continued their conversation about Vikir, with one hound saying that Vikir had defeated a much larger ox bear than the one they had just faced, and that he was already a high-rank sword expert at the 3rd Baskerville technique, which meant that he was at the Shadow Hound's level. Vikir sat on the dead ox bear, lost in thought. He knew it had taken longer than he had anticipated to reach his current level, which was graduate intermediate rank at the 5th Baskerville technique. While his swordsmanship had improved greatly, he felt his growth was much slower than he had hoped for. Suddenly, head butler Barrymore appeared behind Vikir and addressed him as Master Vikir. The butler informed Vikir that the Patriarch was looking for him and that his assignment had been decided. Vikir, with a serious expression on his face, replied with a simple "all right." Vikir entered the Patriarch's office and greeted Hugo. However, he only received a grunt in response. Vikir noticed a cut on Hugo's nose and asked him what had happened. Hugo replied that he had been subjugating barbarians on La Rouge-et-Lenoir mountain, and that one of the archers had gotten the better of him. Vikir asked if he had captured them, but Hugo replied that he had not. However, he did manage to give the archer the same scar on her face. After a moment of silence, Hugo congratulated Vikir on graduating. However, his tone was ominous when he added that it was only going to get harder. Vikir wondered if Hugo was going to talk about the assignment now as he reminisced about his past before his regression. He had been a junior knight of the Pitbull Order, and was sent to the treacherous La Rouge-et-Lenoir mountain to face death non-stop for 21 months. He had been like an expendable mutt, immediately dispatched into battle upon his arrival. He remembered that the Baskerville children were categorized as either elite or expendable once they reached the age of 15. The expendables were sent to die in battle, while the elite were educated about politics and administration. Through numerous brushes with death, the experienced expendables eventually became guards to the elite, while the elite matured over time through practicing politics and administration. Vikir knew that the 5th Baskerville technique existed to let the elite catch up to the expendables' long hours and experiences with real-life battles. However, his swordsmanship had not been able to surpass the 4th technique prior to his regression. There was no way that Hugo, the one in charge, would let him, an illegitimate child, take a course for the elite. Vikir's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by Hugo. Hugo suggested that Vikir should try the lower house of Parliament. Not fully understanding what Hugo meant, Vikir asked for clarification. Hugo explained that the lower house of Parliament assisted the Baskerville clan's regional administration, legislature, and law enforcement, as well as inviting businesses and looking after the region as necessary. Simply put, they managed both small and large matters of the clan. Vicar was surprised that Hugo had selected him, an illegitimate child, to take the elite course. Hugo continued, saying that Vicar's achievements were greater than any child who was referred to as a genius by 10 years. So, he would treat Vicar as such. The position that Vicar would be taking was the deputy consul of the underdog city. Currently, both the consul and deputy consul positions were vacant. Hugo asked Vicar if he would like to try it. After considering Hugo's proposal, Vicar decided to accept the position of deputy consul of the underdog city. However, before proceeding, he wanted to discuss an incident involving the Morg clan and the ruby mines. Hugo seemed to know about it already and referred to how Vicar screwed over Adolf Morg. Vicar confirmed this and asked if he could borrow his reward once. Even though what Vicar wanted to borrow was still not revealed yet, the head butler, who had an idea about it, was shocked at Vicar's bold request. But Hugo didn't seem to mind. He stamped a paper and assured Vicar that he trusted him not to do anything foolish. With confidence, Vicar promised he wouldn't make Hugo worry, but he couldn't help but think how strange it was to be called son by Hugo, something that would have been unimaginable before his regression. As head butler and Vicar walked down the hallway, the head butler spoke in a serious tone. He emphasized the patriarch's high regard for Vicar, as evidenced by his appointment as a consul prior to being dispatched into battle. The head butler referred to this as the disciplines of kingship, suggesting that Vicar was being groomed for greater responsibilities in the future. However, Vicar was not complacent about his new role. He acknowledged that success was not guaranteed and that he would have to work hard to manage his responsibilities as deputy consul. Vicar thought to himself that this was an opportunity for him to hone his skills more safely. He wasn't particularly interested in current events, but his memories from his previous life were still vivid. He remembered the sensation of his head being severed from his body by the guillotine. Vicar decided at that moment that he will let Hugo Le Baskerville feel the same sensation. In the Baskerville territory, underdog, in a large villa, a bald man gave orders to 2 workers, instructing them to ensure that the place is perfectly clean by the next day, as a new deputy consul from the Baskerville family was coming. The workers acknowledged his orders and said yes sir. Later on, one of the workers wondered what kind of person the new deputy consul would be and hoped that he would have experience in business. However, the other worker told him that the new deputy consul was only 15 years old. While they were talking, a young boy was approaching the villa, and the second worker noticed him. He placed his hand on the kid's shoulder and wondered whose child he was and if any employee had brought him. The worker then told the boy that he couldn't just enter the villa freely. It turned out, the young boy who had approached the villa was none other than Vicar. With an angry look on his face, he ordered the worker to remove his hand from his shoulder. Then, he pulled out a paper and showed it to the worker, who was surprised to see that it was the document verifying Vicar's position as the new deputy consul. The workers were confused as to why he had come a day early, but Vicar was not concerned about that. He ordered the workers to prepare food and drinks for a party he was going to have. As Vicar entered the villa, both workers had questioning looks on their faces and wondered why the new deputy consul was planning a party. Soon, the party began, and the whole villa was filled with food and drinks. Many nobles were in attendance, enjoying the festivities and talking with one another. Chihuahua Baskerville, the general secretary of the city of Underdog, was pacing back and forth in his office, clearly agitated. He looked out the window and couldn't believe what he saw. The new deputy consul, a young man who had just started working for the city, was holding a party at the workplace. Chihuahua was already having a hard time because all of his predecessors had been dismissed for accepting bribes. And now, this guy was drinking and partying on the job. Chihuahua couldn't believe the audacity of this troublemaker. As he was about to express his frustration, Vicar suddenly appeared behind him and asked if he was the general secretary. The sudden interruption startled him and he almost jumped out of his skin. He was surprised to see Vicar and wondered how long he had been standing there. Vicar introduced himself as Vicar Van Baskerville, the new deputy consul, and Chihuahua introduced himself as Chihuahua Baskerville. Vicar repeated Chihuahua's name, noting that he didn't have a middle name. Chihuahua thought to himself that it was going to happen again. He knew that a lack of a middle name signified that he was from outside the family and that he was employed rather than a blood member of the family. Chihuahua had to deal with discrimination from deputy consuls because of this. He was tired of being looked down upon and treated unfairly because he wasn't born into the family. But Chihuahua was surprised by Vicar's response. Instead of mocking him, Vicar placed his hand on Chihuahua's shoulder and simply said, "Nice." This threw Chihuahua off guard, and he responded with a confused look. Vicar went on to explain that he had scanned through Chihuahua's personal information on the way there, and had noticed that he was from Underdog. Chihuahua agreed with him, saying that he was born and raised in the current place they were in. Vicar acknowledged this and mentioned that he knew how hard people like him had to work and that he didn't intend to interfere with how he did his job. Chihuahua was still a bit confused but responded with an awkward okay. Chihuahua couldn't help but think that was this some new form of harassment, and wondered why Vicar was even there in the first place when he was the one who asked for the party. But Vicar continued, mentioning that while the personal law system itself didn't have a problem, there were many strange things about the judicial system. Vicar continued speaking, explaining that the problem with Underdog was that many illegal business owners were successful, and as a result, the underground held the power above the law. Simply stopping the illegal businesses wouldn't resolve the problem. The heads of the underground businesses needed to be removed. As a deputy consul, his job was to make laws and execute them, and while he respected all the laws that were already in place, he intended to add a new one. Chihuahua exclaimed in surprise as he heard the word new law. Vicar nodded and explained that he would make sure the underground economy was in shambles within a week. However, he needed a cause in order to make and execute this law. Chihuahua couldn't understand why Vicar needed a cause for getting rid of illegal businesses. Vicar explained that he was still young and a newly appointed deputy consul. He needed a performance in order to make it more convincing. Chihuahua still didn't fully understand Vicar's plan. Vicar looked out of window as his expression turned into an evil grin, and he said that to put it differently, I will lay out poop for the flies. Chihuahua couldn't help but wonder what Vicar was planning. The next day, Vicar arrived at Doorsmile Street in downtown Underdog. A huge crowd had already gathered there and people were chatting among themselves. Vicar stood on the stage with a stake in his hand. Chihuahua and his companions wondered what the deputy consul was planning to do. They commented that there were a lot of people there, and that the deputy consul had been standing there since the crack of dawn. Suddenly, Vicar stepped forward and announced that he was the newly appointed deputy consul. The crowd was surprised to see such a young man as the deputy consul, and wondered what he was going to do. Some of them murmured that he was cute while some questioned what a young man like him could do. Vicar ignored the crowd and said, I believe you have all seen this notice. These are laws that have been in place for a while. Even if the deputy consul has changed, the Baskerville family's laws are still strict as before and will continue to be upheld. However, the crowd did not seem to have any faith in Vicar's words. They muttered among themselves, questioning his ability to carry out laws at such a young age. Some even commented on the corruption of the higher-ups and thought that Vicar would soon fall victim to it. Chihuahua, who stood by Vicar's side, could no longer remain silent. He shouted at the crowd, demanding that they show respect to the new deputy consul. The crowd fell silent, but some still doubted Vicar's ability to uphold the laws, and they thought that Chihuahua might be a better choice for the position of deputy consul. Suddenly, Vicar's actions had the entire crowd in a state of shock. As he pulled up the stake, whole crowd fell silent, and all eyes were fixed on him. With immense power, Vicar then plunged the stake into the ground with such force that the earth around it seemed to shake. The crowd could hardly believe what they were seeing. They were amazed at the sheer strength that Vicar had displayed. But then, Vicar announced something that took everyone by surprise. He said that he would announce a special law, with his authority as a deputy consul known as the Vicar Special Law, which would award 100 million gold to anyone who could remove the stake from the ground. The entire crowd looked at Vicar and the stake in disbelief, trying to analyze what was happening. Suddenly, the crowd erupted into a loud chorus of disbelief, shouting, 100 million.